Um, I had planned a dance performance, but after that one, I decided I wasn't going to ever be better than that, so I decided to talk instead. Um, could I have, oh, okay, so here we are. So my talk is about two experts, and true confession number one, and Asha's already let the cat out of the bag. I am an expert in child development and disabilities. I'm a doctor, and I feel a little scared saying this in this audience. Because doctor is up there with policymaker and government officials as a bad word for most people who work in the space of disabilities. When I completed my medical training 30 years ago, I became a doctor 30 years ago, and 21 years ago, I became a developmental pediatrician. And when I graduated, there was generations of medical wisdom that was passed on to me. And the wisdom went something like this. Oops, what happened? Could I have my slideshow back, please? Okay. So the wisdom went something like, not like this. Whoops. Okay, something like this. So if you were a doctor, okay, this is not working. Oh, the green button, okay. So if this is not, if the wisdom went something like this, if you're a doctor, you need to know everything. And if not know everything, at least pretend like you know everything. The second was, keep your distance, right? You have to maintain your professional distance. You can't bring your personal feelings, your personal stories, your thoughts, your likes and dislikes into the room with you, into your encounter with your families. The third was, you have power. And with great power comes great responsibility. So this was the legacy that weighed heavy on my shoulders. And what I hope to do over the next few minutes is talk about the fact that over the last 20 years, I've changed how I think. I've changed how I think about experts, and I would like to invite all of us to change how we think about experts. So typically, if you came into a room where there was a professional, whether it was a medical professional like a doctor or a medical professional like a therapist, like a physical therapist or a speech therapist, or if you went into a room with a special educator, the pattern is somewhat like this, okay? First is, what is the problem? Why are you here to see me? What is the problem for which you are here to see me? And the second would be, what are your symptoms? So listening to the story and trying to figure out the story of problems and deficits and things which point to what the issue may be, what the problem may be. And the third is the sleuthing, the detective work continues. You examine your patient or the child to figure out where is the problem, what is the disease, right? And then you have your diagnosis and you treat it. It's so simple, except that it's not. When I started working with children with disabilities, I realized that there was a problem with this problem thinking. And the problem is that disability is not a disease. It's not even a deficit. It's the way that humans exist. It's part of our diversity, and it's a complex issue. And if we treat it like a problem and want to fix it, and we treat it like a disease and want to cure it, then we are never going to be able to move ahead and make a plan. You end up feeling helpless, both the professional as well as the person who's come to see the professional. So what is the alternative way of thinking or being? And one of the things I've realized is that you need to invite a second expert into the room. A second expert who knows much more about the child, knows much more about the child's condition or strengths or likes and dislikes, and about the child's family. And that second expert is the child, right? And by extension, the child's mother and father, the immediate family. And so this is the second expert that we need to invite into the room. For most of us professionals here, this means unlearning a lot of what we've learned over the years. To invite a second expert into the room is to acknowledge that someone else has the knowledge, that someone else has the know-how, someone else has the skills. And it means training yourself to ask very different questions. And what might those questions be? So now, instead of asking, tell me the problem or the presenting complaint for which you seek my help today, I have learned to ask this question. What is your hope for what we're going to achieve in today's visit? Immediately, the question shifts from talking about a problem to talking about a hope. And why is that important to you? Why is that important to you is really an important question because it tells you what the priorities of the family is or what the priorities of the child or the person with disability is. So for example, someone may walk into my room and I'll think, oh, I'm sure they want to talk to me about the child's, the way he's walking because, clearly there's an issue with the gait. Instead, when I ask this question, what do you hope to get done today's visit and what is important and why is that important to you? They may say something like, we have a family wedding next month and she gets really anxious on flights and we want to know how to manage that anxiety so we can all be part of the wedding. So that would be a completely different question to answer and you wouldn't answer that if you focused on how the child is walking. The next question is not focusing on what the child can't do, but what the person can do. So Thorkel spoke a little bit about this yesterday, and he was talking about how every professional he met asked, what is the child not able to do? Instead of which, if you ask, what are her strengths? What are the ways in which she is wonderful? What are the ways in which she is unique? It seems like an odd question to ask, especially if you're a professional. You might cringe and say, I don't do questions like that. I don't ask questions like that. But trust me, it gets easier as time goes on. So I want to give you the example of one of my patients. Let's call her Juhi. She's a 10-year-old girl with intellectual disability. And when she came to see me with her parents, and I asked them this question, they were quiet for a minute. You see, Juhi is a 10-year-old who attends an inclusive school. She has intellectual disabilities. She's struggling to read and write. She's still not able to do math at the 3rd grade level where she is. But when I asked them, what's unique about her? Tell me something wonderful about her. And they thought for a minute, and then they looked at each other and said, can we tell you a story? And I said, sure, tell me a story. And the story they told me was this. The previous week, Juhi was at home with her grandmother alone. Her parents had gone out for a family function at night. And when she was alone at home, her grandmother went to bed before her. About half an hour later, Juhi looked at her grandmother and saw that her face was crooked. And she didn't look right. She tried waking her up. She wouldn't wake up. She tried calling her parents. They wouldn't pick up the phone. She ran downstairs at 11 o'clock at night, rang the neighbor's bell and said, you need to come now, my grandma's not okay. And the neighbors came, the ambulance came, and the doctor in the emergency room said, Juhi probably saved her mother's life, her grandmother's life. And so when I asked them, what is this all about? And they said, she's like that. She solves practical problems. She may not know how to solve a 3rd grade math problem, but she knows how to solve life problems. And so that brought me to the next question. How did she learn that? What are some of the things that you both did to make that happen? And in that came the story of their skills. How they focused on what was practical, how they focused on her learning emergency contact numbers, on knowing who to call in an emergency, on making herself breakfast, on making a cup of tea for someone. She was 10 and she could do all of that, right? And her parents had the skills and she had the skills to achieve all of that. So I'm proposing that we change the triad. Instead of talking about problems and symptoms of disease and signs of the problem or the deficit, we focus on hopes, we focus on strengths, and we focus on skills. Because when we do that, we change how we make plans. Juhi's parents came in asking me, is the school program appropriate for her? After we had this conversation, we could focus on what is important for them. What is practical academics? How will she learn to read a recipe? How will she learn to do a shopping list? And that became our focus for the meeting. So when I think about this kind of two-expert thinking, I think about what I want to say to families. And it is this. Everybody is good at something, but you are the expert on your life. And no matter how big and how qualified and how smart the person is in the room with you, the professional, there's only one expert on your life, and that is you. The second part of what I want to say is for professionals, right? What's in it for you? Why would you want to work this way? You remember that initial burden that you had of you need to know everything, you need to solve every problem, you need to know all the answers, you have great responsibility and you have great power. Guess what? That can change for you. You can have permission to bring yourself into the room as a whole with your patient. Not just your professional persona, but your whole persona. You finally have permission. One, to be curious about the child as a person, not just as a disease or a diagnosis, because that's not what it's all about. The second is, you have the opportunity to say, I don't know, but we'll find out together. Because many times when families ask me, do you think he'll go to college? Do you think she'll ever get married? I don't know the answer, but I know that I can partner with them in the journey to find out. And lastly, to be vulnerable. I have laughed with almost all the families that I work with, and I have cried with some of them. I have comforted many of the families I've worked with, and many times I have been comforted by them. And this is because to be vulnerable does not mean to be weak. I think being vulnerable makes me a better physician. It makes me a better human being. And so I'll end with Leonard Cohen's quote, ring the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. Thank you.